Hello everybody, this is your woman flamingo writer here speaking to you all once again, and welcome back to another Magical Girl podcast. Now, what we're going to be looking at today, it happens to be one of the shorter Magical Girl shows out there. So as such, OVA. Now, when I talk about OVAs, they're kind of a dime a dozen when it comes to my channel, because the only time I talked about a full OVA series would have to be from Pet Shop of Horrors. Other than that, I haven't really talked about them a lot more than I thought it would have. And I think that boils down to because there isn't a lot I can say about OVAs, considering they don't really last as long. And I'm not saying this as in that they're necessarily bad or anything like that. There are exceptions here and there, but you can pretty much find them online and judge them for yourself, or find people like, say, Anime or Bennett the Sage, depending on what as he called himself back then, because honestly I feel pretty much synonymous when I say that the OVAs themselves are just not really something I just talk about all the time, and that's really what I have to say. But just because I don't want to talk about OVAs doesn't necessarily mean I can't talk about a Magical Girl kind, because like I said last time, this is probably one of the shortest Magical Girl shows I'll ever cover on this channel, unless I find others that are randomly spread all over the place, but we'll have to see in the future when that comes. So as such, Shamanic. Yeah, this is another Magical Girl series that I haven't seen yet. Not just because of my schedule and everything like that, but also due to the fact that this was also on my watch list that I kind of forgot I had it on there for quite some time. Despite being released in 1996 and lasting for 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. From 1996 to 1998, I don't know how you can manage to have 6 episodes in those amount of time, but I guess that's what happens when you go on hiatus. The series itself actually was released, but mostly in VHS copies. Now, I will say that I thought the series itself would at least get some kind of release afterwards, but from what I can tell, the series itself was released on Tubi, or at least for a bit, because when I tried looking up to see where you can find the series, you can't find it a lot of other places. Which is weird, right? You'd think that something like this series would be available, like, say, something that had obscure titles on the market would be somewhere around the Prime Video, where they have something like Key the Metal Idol, or hell, even more obscure titles like, say, Puppet Princess, for example. But no, yeah, this is one case where I'm pretty much gonna find whatever I can out of these images, and again, like the last Magical Girl podcast I've covered, I do apologize for the images not being as big as they can be. But for a while, most of this series is pretty obscure. Yeah, despite being a must-have for Clamp fans out there, which does kind of have some of their footprints even every now and then, but no, this is actually one case where this is actually just made by some other people with that. The series itself was animated by Triangle staff, which I'll get to them in a bit, but one thing you need to know is that Shamanic Princess never got a full physical release or Blu-ray release like Pet Shop of Horrors did. Instead, you're gonna find VHS copies, and even then, that's really... Yeah, this is one case where I feel pretty bad for this year's series, because while it does seem like something that I would at least say that you shouldn't really miss out on it even if you aren't a Magical Girl fan, this is one case where I feel like even the most obscure series are going to have those titles every now and then. Like I said, the only time that this was released was through VHS copies, and even then you're not going to find any sort of DVD release. So if you ever do find copies of this, you're more than likely just going to have to watch it legally on YouTube, both sub and dub, and even then some of the stuff in there are pretty much hard to watch when you get right down to it. Not because it's uncomfortable, but because it's one of those cases where they put them in random order, which I'll experience my thoughts on as we go along. So without further ado, let's talk about Shamanic Princess and see if it holds up to its chart and true heart, or maybe we're just asking for something else. So let's get started. Our series begins with our main character, Tiara, a powerful sorceress from the magical world known as the Guardian World, who is tasked into retrieving the throne of Yord, an artifact stolen by her former lover, Kagetsu. As such, she disguises herself as a human with the other humans in order to make sure that no one spots her from being a shaman and guardian. And as you can probably imagine, along with her own familiar, Japalo, they do whatever they can in order to get the artifact back, because without it, the world will be in turmoil before then. As you can probably imagine, yeah, they really go so far as to do whatever they can in order to get that artifact back before the whole world will be in jeopardy. Now, I will say for a series like this, it does feel like there's something in there that you could argue that it's not that much going for it, but it's also one of the other Dark Magical Girl shows I've had covering in my list so far that came out before, or Madoka Magica, but still, I think that really gets to the point where, despite that, however, I didn't add this into my other video, if you've seen it last time, where I talked about how Magical Girl shows can't be dark or anything like that, but I think it's safe to say that this is another obscure title for what it's worth. But I'm just going to preference by saying that when you watch the series for yourself, the first 4 episodes of the series are basically structured as a story. Meanwhile, the last 2 of these here episodes are structured in a way that just makes them seem like a sequel. So, yeah, they really dipped their toes into hot water when they didn't really have a lot going for them when it comes to the story. Now, I'm not saying that you can have a story with that kind of structure, but it does beg the question of what would happen if it did last a little longer, had it actually had a little more time for it. But I guess we'll never. First, let's talk about the characters. I mentioned Tiara, so I think it's a safe bet that I wanted to save her for last, but I can't overlook this anymore because when I get right down to it, Tiara's character, if anything, just comes off as something that you wouldn't expect. Like, say, for example, when you think of a magical girl, usually they're more, say, naive and more, say, they know what their task is every now and then. But when it comes to a Dark Magical Girl show like this, I think it's a safe bet that she does act a bit brash towards others, but still has that side to her that she does care at the end. Now, I will say that a brash character, especially one that can be arrogant or something like that, can work for some other things. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against brash characters as long as they actually have a motivating purpose for it. But sometimes, even I'll admit, some of the comments I did see on this here series did say that they gave up after 1 episode, and personally, while I can't really say for sure if that's because they gave up after a while or something like that, I think it's more like say that they really put their toes into hot lava after that, because she does seem to get a little better as time goes on, though admittedly calling it a sequel can be a bit much when you get right down to it. And I have to say, despite being like that, she does have moments where she does share her kindness every now and then, mostly around, say, her closest friend Sarah. And Sarah, her and her are, I guess you could say this is a Yuri or something like that, but they don't really go that far, so I can't really say for sure if that was the case. Also, she turns into this winged creature like thing here. Yeah, she uses Shamanic to do so. Yeah, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce it that good, but seriously, stupid accent aside, I think it's safe to say when you look at her form here, can I just say for the record that it's not everything I was thinking of at first glance, because this here creature doesn't get a name of what she turns into. Sometimes I ask if she's a demon or a succubus, but every time I look it up, they say she's just a 2-winged creature, which is lame title, but I'm just gonna say she looks like it could be a succubus or something. Seriously, what else could you call her besides the pointy ears and other things? That said, however, having a magical girl turn into a succubus may be a lot more than what I was hoping for a Dark Magical Girl show, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Next up we have is Japolo. While he is a ferret in familiar form, I gotta say, he actually is one that's kinda cute and such like that. But he's also very loyal to Tiara, because they actually do care for each other by the end, even if there are times where he has to put up with her own brashy behavior. I will say that I feel pretty bad at first glance, but over time you do get the sense of urge that he does care for her in spite of all that. And I gotta say, having a ferret as your own familiar is not a bad idea, if anything to judge by. Though, speaking of which, if you're wondering why I said familiar, I said it in my Sugar Room video, but I wouldn't blame me for it, since that's been almost 2 years already. But I think it's safe to say that I might as well just say a familiar is really a mascot that these here magical girls use as a companion. Not all of them have it, but still. Next up, there's Helena, and I gotta say, when I first saw this here character in the opening, I thought at first she looked like a little girl or something like that, but no, she's actually a grown woman. Yeah, I do apologize for the images not being as big as they are, but like I said, it's like Full Moon and Sakashite, it's gonna be hard to find images that are clean copies and everything like that. But every now and then, when I think of Lena, I think she may be my favorite character out of the series, because she uses this flute to make some kind of vines or something, and order to beat some kind of bad guy or infuse with someone with her own shamana. I gotta say, that's actually pretty cool in advance. I think the last time I saw some magical girl use a flute would have to be Miyu, but only she used it during the opening and sometimes on occasion during the show, if anything to judge by. But that being said, I'm not talking about Vampire Princess Miyu, because I already did talk about that, so yeah, I think Lena is also pretty fun in her own right, even if she does have her moments where she does snap at Tiara for being a somewhat rival and such like that. I really feel pretty bad, because otherwise I think she would have been a decent partner or something like that. Not partner as in, you know what I mean, but let's move on. Next up we have is Leon, and while it seems like he and Lee are both really together all the time when it comes to being in a relationship, they seem to really have a lot more to them than just that going for it. But Leon himself, there isn't much I can say about him beyond he actually does try to tell Tiara to at least try to do her own tasks as well from time to time, but honestly he's mostly with Lena a lot of times, and I guess you could say that's jealous, there's love going on or anything like that, but I wouldn't even know either way anyways. Also, is it just me, or does his hairstyle kind of remind me of Colin from Code Geass when she had her hair down? I know this came out years prior from Code Geass, but still, it does kind of, I feel like that fitting, considering that fans may be more interested in this, considering the characters are pretty slender, so there you have it. Next up we have is Sarah. I mentioned her earlier, and yeah, she was actually another close friend from Tiara's side, and honestly, despite it being trapped into a different world and such like that, for Tiara to come and to rescue her, it's hard to tell about her character every now and then, because she does seem like she's really one that was so mysterious in some cases, but in other cases you do get to see that she really does seem to care about Sarah more than they may know, even if the undertones are pretty obvious every now and then. Look, you guys got your wish. You wanted it queer baiting, so there you have that. I don't think I have that much to say about her, but oh my god, I don't know if it's just me, but her beautiful beauty really does make her look adorable. I mean, sure, all these characters look really adorable in their own way, but seriously, Sarah's character design, despite coming out during the 90s, I think it really does flow this shoujo-esque feel, if you know what I'm. Though admittedly, whenever you see her in this here form, when in episode 4, in episode 3 or 4, when she does show her true form like that from Kogetsu, who actually shifted into Sarah, you do get the sense of urge that it does get creepy afterwards. Like, seriously, look at this form. It looks like a mouth with a giant eyeball coming across her like that. And people say Dark Magical Girl shows never existed in the 90s. Ha! Though speaking of Kagetsu, I gotta say, for a character that's supposed to be the former lover of our main protagonist, and as such we do get to see how he shapeshifts into anyone he can just to trick people, really does come in place when you think about it. Seriously, I don't know about you guys, but I'm actually a sucker for shapeshifting character or villains, if anything, because you actually do get to see how they could trick the heroine or hero, if anything, to judge by. I know that some people think it's overused in some cases, but I don't know. I think you can still play with the idea a little more. That being said, I will say that he does look kind of cunning in some cases, fitting considering he is a shifter after all, but I gotta at least be honest. Despite that, however, I don't really have that much to say about him beyond that he was the one who backstabbed to Tiara because so-and-so. Like, seriously, I get that this is supposed to be about how love all hurts and everything like that, but still, what the hell, dude? And finally, let's talk about Graham. Now, I will say that Graham doesn't come in until the last episode, but I think that's mostly because he's really the one that actually does seem like he was having a big fair shot, but like I said, we only have 6 episodes. I know I keep repeating that, but there isn't I can say about Graham other than he does seem like he was really intimidating just by looking at him. Like, can't show you the full right here, but I will say that when you look at him, he does have like have a mask or something like that, or a half face, if anything, judged by. It kind of reminds me of Two-Face from Batman, if anything, and I do really respect them from giving him a creepy look, considering what he does to our heroes, and it does really show in the last. But all those characters aside, I would tell you about the human characters that they call the three teenagers. Yeah, I don't know what's so great about calling them the three teenagers. Like, seriously, that's really the blandest name up there with the Guardian world, if anything. And honestly, I don't really want to say that's a way of saying things, but I'm just saying that it just feels pretty sad that we don't get that much into these here girls, other than they're just there to be friends with Tiara when she's in her human form, just to disguise herself. But even with that said, however, I gotta say, Shamanic Princess does have some things going for it as well. And I wish I could tell you more about the story, but like I said, there isn't much I can say about it anyways, but I guess I might as well talk about a little bit of it before it goes. So like I said, this year's series itself was only released in VHS, and I wouldn't complain so much, but if it wasn't for the fact that some people probably had the memory, or maybe when it was on Tubi for quite a while, maybe it would have had something like that. But by the time of this recording, I actually take a double take just to see if there's any other sites that have it, and apparently it did seem like they have it on Crunchyroll for as long as they want to, so clearly it's not totally lost if you actually want to see this series for yourself, if anything. But I guess the only reason why not a lot of people have seen it is probably because of the very limited VHS releases they had. If this series had made it done today, maybe it would have a fair shot, if anything, but I can't say much about Triangle Staff because... Okay, even if you've never heard of Triangle Staff, or maybe never seen of any of her products before now, I'm just gonna say you probably knew where this was coming, so let's talk about it. Though you might be familiar with Triangle Staff if you've seen something like Serial Experiments Lane, which is something that I'm trying to look forward to myself from watching, so clearly they did have dark stuff too that time. But like I said, Triangle Staff is, you guessed it, defunct. It defunct quite a while already, and even so, the releases they had were pretty sporadic by things considered. Now, I feel kind of ashamed because honestly, when it comes right down to it, there are some products here and there that do seem like they always have a studio out there that would shut down after that. I'm not saying that this is Triangle Staff for defuncting in 2002 or 2003. What I am saying, however, is that it's kind of sad that you're not going to find a remake of Shamanic Princess, or sometimes either way. It really goes without saying. OVAs can be, whether you like it or not, sometimes you can put them into different places, or sometimes you can find access to them. What I'm getting at is that, whether you like it or not, I feel pretty bad Shamanic Princess is one of those cases where you're going to find not many people talk about it, or at the very least, you're not going to find people have too many memories about this year series, because, like I said, they usually show this around, say, around YouTube if you want to find access to it, if anything, to make it legally free to watch. But even with that said, I feel kind of bad. This is one case where, despite the series having its own things here and there, I feel kind of sad that nobody seems to watch this every now and then because, well, let's talk about those episodes in length. Because, like I said, while this is 6 episodes long, I think it's only fitting to talk about how it's presented. See, despite the series having its own length, this is one case where I feel like the length itself is kind of out of order. Remember when I said that this year's series had their out of order range when it comes to playlists? Well, here's what I mean by that. When I watch an episode online just to see the playlist of all these episodes, one playlist will just have the episodes in random order. Like, say, episode 1 somehow is titled episode 3. Meanwhile, all the other episodes are all jumbled mess. I don't know if that's really due to copyright or anything like that, or maybe they got the episodes confused, or that's just how it was released on VHS, but I wouldn't know because I never grew up with this series, nor did I even know the series existed before a few years prior when I was making my watch list. And even then, that still kind of raises a bunch of eyebrows why they did that. That being said, however, Shamanic Princess does seem like the kind of series that actually has one thing that I personally don't really have that much to go by. And that's because the whole thing with Shamna, I'm just going to come out and say it, I don't have that much experience with it. I'm not saying this as in I don't really think that's a go-to thing when it comes to the Magical Girl shows. You can create however you want with your own ideas, as long as you know how to play with your ideas and know what you're cooking with them. But the thing is, however, the princess actually uses this to make her own form, and as such, you can probably connect the dots here and there how that works. So I guess that really why they use Shamana in order to do so. And I'm not so sure what to say that, because the Hamza hand, while I have seen it, I'm trying to use it for my writings and such. Even I'm trying to see what you can do for it for studying. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I guess you could say that there were a lot of dark tales they could have done, but they didn't do much with it. The VHS releases were pretty much over what they had, and whatever they could make is probably whatever they had in itself. And I feel kind of bad that despite that, however, you're only going to find this, like, again, on VHS copies from YouTube, or you can watch it on Crunchyroll for the time's sake that it's on. I feel kind of bad considering that it does. It's kind of suck when you see a series itself that got obscure, but I think there's only one of two ways. And by that I mean there are one of two ways I think why they had it so obscure. Either people never really had this bother when it was coming to VHS at the time, because they actually did have both the sub and the dub, or there are some people out there that just never knew existed prior to that. Yeah, we should probably mention about the sub and dub. Now, I will say that this is one of the cases where this was one of the few Magical Girl shows that did get a dub as well, and it's average. Like, I'm not saying that the dub itself is the worst out there, far from it, but I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it feels like they were going on the nose with how they had these here lines. I know that some dubs out there that can do lines that can go with what the dub is saying, but my god, it felt like they were reading off the script for whatever they had, and that's what they had, and just ran with it, to just so they can make it the clearest, accurate thing you can say. And when it comes right down to it, I feel kind of bad considering that it does look like it had potential with that. You get some great voice actors like Tara Sands or Rachel Lillis to picture that come to that, but then again, this came from Central Park Media, a hit or miss studio that was during the time that had something to do with their own dubs at the time, so I can't really say that's their fault anyways. You know, every time someone brings up that it's the actor's fault for her making their dubs so really warranted to make them sound bad, I rather blame the director for that. Seriously, why are you blaming actors for something that they had no experience to take control over? Unless you can say there are some voice actors that can make their own voice direction work. I mean, seriously, Funimation did that for a time, and I never really had a problem with that. But I guess when technically speaking is that it feels like Shamanic Princess is one of those dubs where it was a niche during the time. Dubs themselves were still being in limbo, and since OVAs were really one of those cases where they did have access to these here dubs as well, it goes without saying they really did whatever they could with it. And that's another thing I feel bad for Shamanic Princess. It has some great dub voice actors that you might be familiar with, but along the way you just start asking yourself that, yeah, this is one case where you can pretty much watch it for yourself. For me personally, I'm not saying that the dub is bad, I'm just saying it's average at best. It's more on the so average that I call it a decent territory, but nowhere near as superb like other dubs out there. Though you could really make fun of it if anything to judge by, but that's really a story for someone else to cover. So ultimately, I think Shamanic Princess is a very overlooked gem. It just didn't really seem like it was fair for everyone to overlook this, but I can kind of see why everyone would look at it times if it's something like that. I mean, hell, Prime Video usually has something that has obscure titles every now and then. The same could be said with other sites out there. But I must confess, if it wasn't for the VHS releases out there or something like, say, the internet, we probably wouldn't have had something like that every now and then. No wonder why they call it a fever dream, because when you watch something as a kid, sometimes those memories can jack your memory up and think, hey, I think I may have watched this, and after watching it, you kind of have to retrace your steps to see if you had. Believe me, I know how that's like. But that being said, however, I don't really think Shamanic Princess should be a series that we should overlook. I think, like I said, you can watch this series legally for free on YouTube if you want to see it on yourself, or you can find it on Crunchyroll if you want a cleaner copy of it. One of those two are your options, but it's really your choice by the end of the day. But after that, however, it's going to take me a while to watch the next Magical Girl show, because you thought that Sailor Moon was pretty old? Well, we're going to something that came from Go Nagai. Yeah, I never thought I'd bring that guy up on my channel, but we'll talk about him next time. So until then, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay flamingotastic. I'll see you all around.